rope hit the post wrong, and the calf bolted before anyone could blink. Every man on the fence line laughed. Not one of them offered to help. Lucia Vargas coiled her rope back with steady hands, wiped the dust from her jaw, and walked back to the starting position without a word. She had done this before. The laughing part, the watching part, the part where nobody hired her anyway. It was the third ranch that week that had turned her away. Not because she could not ride, not because she could not work, but because of the simple, quiet fact that she was a woman, and nobody out here in the dry stretch of western New Mexico wanted to deal with the questions that came with that. It was easier to say no. They always made it sound polite. We are fully staffed right now. We are not taking anyone on this season. Come back in the fall. She never came back in the fall, because she knew what the fall answer would be too. Lucia was 26 years old. She had grown up on a small spread outside of a town called Rio Largo, where her father, a quiet man named Hector, taught her how to read horses before she could read books. She could smell rain 2 days before it came. She could tell which cow was sick from 100 yards away just by the way it held its ears. She could break a young horse in 3 days flat, and she could do it without scaring the animal half to death the way some men did. She had skills. Real ones. The kind that came from years of cold mornings and bleeding hands, and starting over when the horse threw you and you were not sure anything was not broken. None of that seemed to matter today. She loaded her saddle into back of her old truck, which had rust running along the wheel wells and a cracked passenger window she had patched with tape. The engine always hesitated before it caught. She turned the key twice, listened to it struggle, then felt it finally roll over into something steady. She pulled out a ranch drive and pointed herself down the main road. Her money would last another 10 days if she was careful. After that, she would have to find something else, and she did not want to think about what that meant. The town of Solano was about 15 miles east, and she passed through it slowly, watching the signs on the storefronts the way a person does when they are not sure what they are looking for. Hardware, feed, a small diner with a handwritten board in the window. She almost kept going. Then something made her pull over, not at the diner, but at the small feed store on the corner, where a man had just stapled a piece of paper to the wooden post outside the door. She stepped out of the truck and read it. It said, "Ranch hand needed. Immediate start. Rio del Sol Ranch. Ask for Carlos Mendez. Bring experience, not excuses." She read it again. The handwriting was blunt and square, the kind of person writes when they mean what they say. She folded nothing. She asked nothing. She drove the direction the small hand-drawn map at the bottom of the paper pointed her. Rio del Sol was not a pretty ranch. That was the first thing she noticed. It was not one of those places with white fences and a painted sign out front. It was a working ranch, the kind that looked like it had been in a fight with the land for 40 years, and neither side had one clean. The fences were mended but not manicured. The barn was solid but old. There were horses in a far pen moving with a kind of nervous energy that told her immediately something had upset them recently. Maybe that morning. A man came out of the barn before she even got her door open all the way. He was somewhere past 60, she guessed, with gray at his temples and the kind of face that had spent too many decades under a hard sun. Not unkind, just formed by work. He wore no hat, which surprised her little. Just boots and jeans and a flannel with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. That was Carlos Mendez. He looked at her the way she expected. Not rude, just reading. She did not wait for him to start. She said her name was Lucia Vargas, that she had worked cattle since she was 8 years old, that she could ride anything with 4 legs and a bad attitude, that she could mend fence, pull a calf, read weather, manage a sick animal, and handle night checks without being told twice. He let her finish. He did not look amused or dismissive. He just stood there with his arms loose at his sides. And then he asked her one question. He asked her what she would do if a horse would not load. She paused, not because she did not know the answer, but because it was such a specific question and such an honest one, and nobody else had ever asked her anything like it. They had mostly just shaken their heads and told her it was not a good fit. She told them the truth. She said it depended on the horse. She said some horses would not load because they were afraid, and with those you moved slowly and you let them investigate the trail on their own terms, and you never pushed because pushing would set you back 2 days for every 10 seconds of impatience. She said some horses would not load because they were testing, and with those you were patient but firm, and you kept pressure steady and release at the moment they moved forward, even a single step. She said the mistake most people made was treating every horse the same, and that no horse was the same, and that the fastest way to get a horse loaded was to figure out which kind of problem you were actually dealing with before you started. Carlos Mendez looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "We have a horse that is not loaded in 3 weeks. Nobody here has been able to do it. I have a run in 4 days, and I need that horse on a trailer." She said, "Show me the horse." The horse was a blue roan mare named Sol, which she thought was fitting for a ranch called Rio del Sol. Sol was 4 years old, and she was not mean. Lucia could see that right away. She was scared. Something had happened in that trailer, or near it, or maybe just around the time of loading, that had burned itself into the animal's memory, and now the trailer was a wall she would not go near. Lucia did not touch the horse that first afternoon. She just sat near the corral fence with her back to Sol and waited. People thought that was strange when they saw her do it. Carlos watched from a distance and said nothing. A younger man on the ranch, a lean kid named Pedro, who could not have been more than 19, leaned on a post and watched her the way you watch something you do not quite understand. Sol watched her back. That was what mattered. By the time the light was going orange and low, the mare had walked over twice to sniff the back of Lucia's hat. Lucia did not move either time. She just let it happen. The third time, she slowly turned her head and let Sol see her face, and Sol did not bolt. She just stood there with her nostrils working and her eyes soft enough that Lucia knew the door was open. Carlos offered her a bunk in the small room off the back of the barn. She took it. It was clean. She had slept in worse. The next morning she worked Sol for 2 hours in a round pen with nothing in her hand but a lead rope and a quiet voice. She did not ask the mare to do much. She asked her to move, to stop, to turn, to come in when called. She asked her to trust that the person holding the rope would not surprise her. Each time Sol got it right, Lucia stepped back and gave her a breath of space. That was a reward. Not a treat or a pat, just the release of pressure, room to breathe. Horses understood that language better than any other. Pedro watched from the fence and tried to look like he was not paying attention. An older hand named Rafael came by and leaned on the gate for a while before wandering off again. Nobody said anything to her. Nobody made it hard. Carlos appeared twice, looked, and left both times without speaking. On the afternoon of the second day, she walked Sol to within 20 feet of the trailer and let her stand there. Sol's ears went forward and her muscles tightened, and she did not move any closer, but she did not run. Lucia stood beside her and watched the trailer with the same calm expression she was asking the horse to have, like it was nothing, like it was just a box of metal sitting in the dirt that held no fear and told no bad stories. That night at dinner, Pedro asked her how she knew to do all that. He was genuinely curious, not challenging her. She told him it was just listening. She said the horse was telling her what she needed every minute. And if you paid attention instead of deciding what you already knew, the horse would teach you exactly how to help it. Pedro leaned forward on his elbows and asked if that approach worked for every horse she had ever handled, or just the ones that were afraid. She thought about it honestly and told him that there were horses she had not been able to reach, horses that had been treated badly for so long that the damage ran too deep for any amount of patience to fully undo, and that you had to accept that too, because pretending you could fix everything was its own kind of arrogance. Pedro nodded like that answer meant something to him beyond horses. Rafael, who was sitting across the table with a cup of coffee and a face that gave very little away, said quietly that he had been working with horses for 30 years, and he had never heard anyone put it that way. He said it like it was a compliment. She took it as one. On the morning of the third day, Sol walked herself halfway up the trailer ramp. Lucia had not asked her to do it. She had just opened the trailer door and stood off to the side, and Sol had walked over, sniffed the ramp, and taken 2 steps up on her own before stopping. Lucia did not react. She did not cheer or move toward her. She just held her breath and let the moment be what it was. Sol stood on the ramp for about 10 seconds and then backed off and walked away. That was enough. That was more than enough. Carlos was leaning on the barn door when it happened. When Sol backed off the ramp, he walked over to Lucia, and his expression had changed in the way expressions change when a person sees something they were not sure they were going to see. He asked if she thought the horse would make the run. She said, "By tomorrow morning, yes." He nodded once, slowly, and went back to what he was doing. She was right. By the next morning, Sol walked fully into the trailer, stood calm while the gate latched behind her, and did not fight it. Pedro actually made a sound of disbelief on the fence, a short, sharp exhale, and then covered it by clearing his throat. Raphael came over and said nothing but put a hand briefly on the side of the trailer in a way that felt like acknowledgement. Carlos came to her that afternoon while she was brushing Sol down in the cross ties. He told her the job paid fair, included the bunk and meals, and that he expected good work every day and honesty when something was wrong, because problems that got hidden on a ranch had a way of becoming disasters. She said that sounded right to her. He said, "One more question." She waited. He asked her if she could stay through the fall roundup, which was 3 months out, and whether she had anything else that was going to pull her away before that. She thought about the rust on her truck and the tape on the window and the 10 days of money she had left and the 3 ranches that had sent her away without even watching her work. She told him no. Nothing was going to pull her away. She had been moving since she was 22, chasing work across 3 states, sleeping in her truck more nights than she wanted to count, and she was done with chasing. If this was the place, she was going to stay in it and make it worth something. He said good, and that was the end of the conversation. The days that followed had a rhythm to them that felt, for the first time in a long while, like something she could breathe inside of, up before light, feed and water, morning checks. Whatever the day needed after that, whether it was fence or calves or moving cattle to new grazing or working with the young horses that still had rough edges, she did not have to prove herself every hour. That was the part she had not expected. After the first week, it just became work, the same as it was for Pedro and Raphael and the other 2 hands who came and went through the season. There was a stretch in the middle of August when a fast-moving storm came through and took out a long section of fence on the north pasture, and the cattle got through in the dark before anyone saw it. Lucia had been awake because she slept lightly near storms. She had Sol saddled before anyone else had boots on, and by the time the others were mounted, she had already pushed the first group of strays back toward the gap and was marking in her mind where the others had gone by the tracks the mud was holding. They worked through what was left of the night and into the gray morning, and by the time the sun was actually up, they had all but 4 cattle accounted for. The 4 were found by mid-morning in a dry creek bed 2 miles out. Carlos said nothing about it that day, but a week later, when a feed supplier named Don Ortega came out to the ranch for a delivery and stood talking with Carlos by the truck, she overheard Carlos say that she was the best hand he had put on in 10 years. He did not say it loud. He was not saying it for her to hear. She just happened to be close enough. And the morning was quiet. She kept brushing the horse she was working on and did not look up, but she felt something settle in her chest. Not pride exactly, more like proof, like something that had been waiting for a long time to become solid had finally done it. The fall roundup came, and it was hard work in the honest way that good hard work tends to be. Long hours, rough country, cattle that had been out in the high pastures all summer and were feeling independent about being gathered. Pedro had grown into the work noticeably over the months. He did not lean on fences and watch anymore. He rode beside her sometimes and asked sharp questions and listened to what she said and tried it. Raphael remained quiet and capable and reliable in the way that certain people just are. On the last day of the roundup, when the count was done and the numbers were good, and everyone had come back from the last drive, Carlos stood at the gate and watched the cattle settle, and then looked over at Lucia with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was satisfaction, the plain, uncomplicated kind. He told her the job was hers as long as she wanted it. She looked back at the cattle in the pen, and at the horses tied to the rail, and at the old barn with the solid bones, and at the sky over the high desert, which was going that deep blue it only went in October when the air thinned out and everything became very clear and very still. She told him she was not going anywhere, and she meant it the way you mean something when it has taken a long time to find, and you're not about to let the road pull you back into the searching. The truck with the taped window sat by the bunkhouse. The rust was still there on the wheel wells, but she was not thinking about the truck. She was thinking about the next morning and the horses and the work. and the fact that not one person on this ranch had ever once asked her to be anything other than exactly what she was. That turned out to be more than enough. That turned out to be everything.